happy to introduce you to Richa, and in a few seconds, Richa will be able to start the webinar. We have about an hour of this webinar. This is a very important one because it's talk about the importance of maintaining and updating environmental monitoring programs. So we all have monitoring programs at the facilities, especially when you are processors. And you have to demonstrate that you have an effective ones, right? Not only for your audits, but also for the company, just to make sure that you don't have recalls. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And as Richa will go through the presentation, please start writing your sentences, your questions. If you have questions, that will be appreciated if you can write down. There's a question of me. You're going to see a Q&A session, Q&A button down below. You can just write your sentence. I'm going to be your host. I'm Tanguy Etoga, and I'll relay the question to Richa. So Richa, you can go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Tanguy, for introduction. I'll start with my brief introduction. My name is Richa, and I'm today taking this opportunity to talk about the importance of maintaining and updating the environmental monitoring programs. Are they really important? How much they are important regulatory-wise? And just a brief introduction about myself. I've worked in a few food facilities as a quality manager, and also consulted a few companies on their food safety programs, helping them in their audits, SQF audits, and all that stuff. From my experience, I can say that environmental monitoring should always be based upon the specific ingredients that that facility is handling, the specific processes that they're undergoing, the map of the facility, how you're segregating your raw ingredients from your finished product. And we may use standard templates that are guidance, like the guidance documents that are provided by some regulatory organization, but we need to tweak them from our facilities point of view. Templates could be used as a standard reference, always, and always base your environmental monitoring programs on a risk assessment, which will let you know what threshold limits to set for various parameters. So let's begin. Can you all see my screen moving? Like we move to the second slide?
Yes, we can. We can see your screen.
Okay.
Maybe before you can start, Richa, I want to start 30 seconds poll. I want to launch that to get to know each other. So I'm starting the poll right now. It's just normal question: where you are, what you do. So you can go ahead and answer the questions. So we have people from the States, from Canada. Excellent. So we have people from the States and from Canada, basically, and everyone is from Quality Assurance. So you can go ahead.
Richard,
go ahead. Yeah,
that's great. So today, some of the discussion points that I'm going to go through is what is environmental monitoring, and do we even need an environmental monitoring program in the food facilities? The methods to implement the programs, the frequency of conducting environmental monitoring, where I feel most of us just base it off of discretion and past results from third-party labs, and what to do when you get positives. So to start with a basic introduction of EMP, I think it's a proactive or an early warning system that helps us identify various pathogens or contaminants in our facility, which we can isolate in a timely manner if we have a very effective monitoring program. That would help us preventing the contaminant or the pathogen to spread out through the facility. So the basic misconception, I would say, that if you have a cooking or a kill step, you can like have a little slack on your environmental monitoring program, which I do not think is a right assumption to make, because even if you have a cooking or kill step, it depends on if you're exposing your product, like exposing your finished product before you're packaging it. So if you had a cooking step, for example, you have cooked lasagna, but before packaging, you're exposing it on a conveyor belt on the line before packaging it, then you require an effective environmental monitoring program to locate if there is a possibility of some contaminants or pathogen to enter in between that cooking step and the final product, the final packaged product. So how it works, I would say the first step would be zoning. Like you'll have to divide your facility into 4 different zones. Zone 1 is the product contact surfaces, the direct product contact surfaces, like the product equipment. For example, if you're using a mixer, if you're mixing some flavors into your food product, then the mixing equipment comes in direct contact with food. So that becomes a zone 1. Other example could be knives, conveyors, peelers, your work tables, your packaging table. Zone 2 would be the areas that are adjacent to zone 1. For example, if you're having some fresh produce, if some fresh produce going through a conveyor belt, then the side of those conveyor belts would be zone 2 because it's adjacent to the food contact surface. Zone 3 would be areas in exposed products away from zone 1. They're a little away, but they still can contribute somehow. So the nearest wall to your conveyor belt could be an example of zone 3. Your forklifts, because they come and go in the production area, and if some fresh produce falls off on the floor, like what you're doing with that. So, and the zone 4 would be your warehouses, your offices, your washrooms. These are the areas outside your exposed products. So your dispatch area could be an example of zone 4. Number 2 is sampling plans and determination of pathogens. So we need to know what pathogens are we really looking for. This, we can determine these things based upon past third-party reports or past incidences in your facility. But in general, we are looking for pathogens such as Listeria, Salmonella, and E. coli. Listeria and E. coli is more common because you may be using water in your facility, and water have the tendency of their growth. So SQF wants you to test for these pathogens. And also, if you have any other pathogen that could be in your facility based upon your like previous history, then you can add those pathogens as well. The third point is risk assessment and response. For risk assessment and response, you need to use some tools such as ATP. ATP is I would say it's a light emitting device which helps you determine the effectiveness of sanitation in your facility. And if you know that your facility is sanitized enough, you can confidently say that you could have restricted growth of certain pathogens. So this is a good tool to be used as your risk assessment strategy, one of the good tools. Then for risk assessment, you can use in-house testing. You could base your frequency, like if you're in an ice cream manufacturing facility where you're using pasteurized cream and pasteurized all other ingredients like pasteurized eggs and etc. Then, and ultimately your product goes for freezing, you can base the testing of the finished product based upon, like, for example, if you're making a batch from morning 8 to night 8. You can have 3 tests based upon 3 tests throughout that time to ensure that there is no growth or no growth of any pathogens. We generally test for like total plate count and the rapid E. coli tests, which gives an estimation the next day that if there would have been any potential growth, that would also tell how your employees have been handling the product throughout that day. So response is planning a rapid response to positives. Planning a rapid response is like, what would you do if you get a positive result the next day of your testing? Like, how will you isolate it? How will you have those red hold labels ready to put on the entire lot that has been found to be contaminated? Then how will you sample some of the product from that particular lot to say that the first few pallets are infected and the last few pallets are not. So the fourth point is train your team. You may get some false positive based upon how your quality technician or how your team is handling the samples, how for example, your team doesn't know while he or she is collecting a sample, they're not wearing gloves. They accidentally threw the sample collecting bags on the floor, then they picked it up again and they collected the sample for testing in those. So keeping an eye on how your team is working is also important for an effective environmental monitoring program. How you're maintaining your lab hygiene. For example, when I was working in a lab, we had certain positives and we used to hold a lot of product. We didn't know what was happening, so we sampled a lot of equipment and found, at the end, we found out that our pipette was the culprit because it was not cleaned since 1.5 years. So when we opened and disassembled that pipette, it was highly dirty. There was a layer of biofilm on it. So I think it's extremely important to take care of the lab, take care of the tabletops in the lab, that they're hygienic, because they may then give you false positives and increase your work unnecessarily, which happened with us. We would sample all of our finished product, which was on hold, and at the end, nothing would come out from them. And we would have those false positive and wasted product and wasted time. So in-house testing is another area where you need to train your team, because if they don't dilute the product in peptone water in the right settings, then it would again result in false positives. Sampling for third-party lab, whenever you are sampling, the most common mistake, especially in summers, is people forget to put some ice packs in your samples, which increases the temperature of your sample while they reach the lab, and they are no longer trustworthy to be taken samples, to be tested. So these are certain few points that we need to take care while we design our environmental monitoring program, where we should have those SOPs made for our technicians to follow. So next, this is a map of the hygienic zoning program for food facilities. This is another way of dividing your food facility in high risk, medium risk, and low risk areas, so that your team knows that when we are moving from high risk zones to low risk zones, we need to change gloves. We need to re-clean like containers or stainless steel buckets, if you're taking from a high risk zone to a low risk zone. And if you're taking something from a high risk zone to the production line, then we need to re-clean or sanitize those spatulas. So those small little things could be, so the hygienic zoning program map could be used as a training tool while you're doing your annual training with your employees and help them understand why GMPs are so important. So the other important thing is record keeping of the environmental monitoring, like what we are doing, how we are selecting the locations for collecting samples, what we are swabbing for, determining the sample frequency. So I just created a little table of how those records could be maintained. Date of sampling should be on every record, like when did you sample, what is the frequency. In this case, I just took an example of twice per month because there are so many locations and you can't cover all the locations in just one sample. Sometimes the facilities are too big. So for in-house or third party, you need to specify what record keeping you're doing, because at the end, your auditor will come and ask how you're sending your samples, what are your results. So you need to keep all those documentation handy. Then you need to divide them into zones so that when you're presenting these records for your audit, your auditor knows that all the zones have been covered and there's effective environmental monitoring programs being followed at your facility. So the other parameters for environmental monitoring, which are equally important, are water. So you need to send your water samples for microbiological testing. And when I say water, for example, you just have municipal water coming all through your facility, but you have, say, 12 hoses or 12 areas where you're using that particular water, then it becomes important to get the samples off of all those 12 hoses because I'll just give you an example. I was in a facility where we had like 6 or 7 hoses and we would test each hose every 2 months so that every hose is taken annually. So one of the hoses came out as positive, but all the other 6 hoses were fine. There were no pathogen presence in them. So this was alarming, that why did it happen, and the results came from a accredited third-party lab. So when we opened that hose, we found that there were a lot of debris, a lot of mold that may have contributed to some presence there in that particular hose. So that's why I say it's, even if the source of water coming through your facility is one, but please do check and maintain the hoses or the plumbing stations from where your water is coming into your facility. So air is another important thing that we need to test in our environmental monitoring program. The other testing should be done for yeast and mold. So for example, if you're in a facility where there's a high cold, like very cold areas, then there's freezer area, and they're connected doors, there's change of temperatures, a lot of condensation can happen in between doors, in between your like on the side of the walls when you go from one area to another. And those areas, you can have some yeast and mold presence. So this calls for those, this will help you determine what areas could be affected by yeast and mold and help you determine and maintain those areas well. Like re-cleaning and cleaning could be the only way to prevent such issues. The next is waste. So most people forget. So most facilities have their wash up areas or waste areas segregated from their main production line, but sometimes it's connected to their raw receiving areas. So it's very important to plan traffic flows, because you don't want to like have your traffic flow in a way that your waste area comes in between through the raw area. And if something goes unnoticed, it may get carried through to your production area. So always plan a traffic flow, have separate carts for carrying waste, have color coded containers, like waste containers, like color them black or color them purple, whatever, so that nobody else would use it for, say, sanitation, chemical keeping, or for any other purposes. Like the waste container should not be used for any other purposes. And rewash your reusable containers that go and come out of the waste room. Also include swabbing in waste rooms, so that you know that no contaminant is entering through outside into that waste room and being carried over through your shoes or something. The most I would suggest to keep we have those chlorine pellets or peracetic acid pellets. So always have those handy and keep it, like throw them on the floor where you enter and exit the waste room, so that the shoes are always sanitized, or have those, automatic shoes cleaning pipes that run through the facility. The next consideration that we need to take care of ceilings. Ceilings are something that are mostly overlooked, but when an auditor comes in, if he would definitely look at ceilings to see if you're well maintaining your facility. Sometimes in freezers and refrigerators, ceilings are the most condensation prone zones, because especially in summers when there's so much temperature difference and people coming and going out of freezers while they're keeping their lots in there, there could be a possibility. Air handling areas such as exhaust, conduit, screens, and filters. 3M have those nice, quick yeast and mold plates and environmental plates where you can expose the area for 15 minutes and have those results handy with you, which can be done monthly, which can be done annually based upon how your facility is going to adopt this program. So other tools that are important is ATP swabbing of tools such as knives, scorers, spatula, stainless steel bucket, wheels of the wheeled equipment. Sometimes the wheels or the underneath the equipments, those areas gets overlooked. So another example is when I was working at a facility, we had a mixer there. The mixers are huge. We were near an audit, so everybody was looking for areas that could be cleaned and well maintained, but nobody happened to look under those mixers. So those mixers are really close to the ground, and you have to like squish in a lot to see what's going on underneath. So when we looked underneath, we found a lot of green, like a lot of green and black and brown debris stuck onto the mixers, which is not good to have in a production area. So always like ATP swab such neglected areas, so that you could have an all-round environmental monitoring program or all-round development in the facility. So do we really need environmental monitoring programs in our food facility? I would say, why not? But if we go through FDA or SFCR, environmental monitoring program, it's a guidance. Nobody is going to say that you don't have an environmental monitoring program, but if there's an audit, anything, they would ask, why don't you have it? Because it's very difficult to explain that your facility is pathogen free and there's no possible growth in the future that might not occur. So if your facility is pathogen free and if you're not following any environmental monitoring programs, then you should have a very sound, validated proof of that to show to your auditor, and you could get an exemption. So the decision is voluntary, but to answer the why not, I would say an environmental monitoring program would help you validate and verify the effectiveness of the good manufacturing programs you have in your facility. You would be able to validate and verify how hygienically your team is trained and how hygienically they are working in the facility. So the other reason is your product undergoing a kill step? If yes, then you would want to know how much time it's exposed before it's being packaged. Is the product a combination of RTE? Because the regulations want they regulate environmental monitoring programs for RTE products, because ready to eat products do not include any kill step or microwave step or something like that. They are to be consumed as is. So so if your facility is using, say, a number of RTE ingredients that does not include a kill step at the end, then you would want to have that environmental monitoring program. It's important for you to be safe as a facility if something occurs, but also if you want to become a good brand, then it shows how much you care for your consumers. And then refrigerated versus frozen foods, like how much of environmental monitoring you would need in frozen foods, because we know that the pathogens are inactivated in frozen state. But what if somebody thought that product on in their kitchen and they started consuming it, and there was some possible growth during that particular exposure time? So you can never judge that correctly. So it's safe to have an environmental monitoring program. So there are some methods by which we can implement these programs. We should have written procedures, proper SOPs that needs to be followed by each technician or people handling the product. You need to determine the effectiveness of a sanitation program that you can do by ATP, that you can do by in-house testing, swabbing, having weekly listeria swabs in-house so that you know how effective your sanitation program is. Identifying microorganisms, what pathogens you're checking for, identifying like small little hidden locations where those growths can occur. For example, we had this mixer in the facility, which used a staircase to go and use it. So there was some listeria growth on below the staircase. So you need to identify these hidden locations where your pathogens can hide, and they can easily get overlooked, because since these areas are not direct food contact surfaces, still they can be a potential threat. Then determining a frequency, how often are you going to test? How often are you going to send it to third party? How often you're going to do an in-house testing? And this would be based upon what past incidences you've had in your facility and what do you expect from your environmental monitoring program. Then developing some corrective action procedures in case some positive occurs, and testing from an accredited lab is extremely important. On my right, I have some references from CFIA. These are some procedures and guidance documents that they have provided for for like food facilities to use if they have some presence, what should they do? So these are little guidance templates or documents that are provided by them. I have the link provided on my presentation. So some other methods, elaborating on these methods, is doing a risk assessment analysis of the hazards, right from the ingredients to the processes. If we are using RTE ingredients, are we using raw ingredients which are not going to be processed later? So determining the pathogens in the environment, if any, map and traffic flow of facility with zonings. Sampling procedures are important. Like if I'm producing 10,000 units in one shift, how many samples I'm going to collect? 3 samples for 10,000 units would not be like representative. You could increase it to 4 or 5, depending on what your process is. Frequency of sample collection per location. And SOPs for how swabbing needs to be performed, paperwork from accredited lab, procedures and justification for in-house testing. So frequency of conducting environmental monitoring. Annual is a standard guidance that it should be annual, but it's best determined or best described based upon the specificity, the ingredients your facility is handling. I can share a little example. If a facility is producing salad packages that includes raw cut lettuce, diced cauliflower, diced kale in it, with a salad dressing and a pack of croutons in it. So this product is supposed to be consumed raw with all other ingredients. This makes it extremely important to maintain extreme high standards of hygiene in this facility. So after conducting initial pre-operational environmental monitoring, you may choose to conduct monitoring activities weekly in high-risk zones. So those high-risk zones could be the blades, the conveyors, the tables, the dicing equipment, where those raw produce are diced or washed or cut into or shredded into pieces, and monthly in lower risk zones such as walls, floors, and drain. The goal here is only to justify that your frequency of sampling and testing is sufficient to determine that your sanitation efforts are effective. So for example, in your third-party analysis or the third-party results that come back, you get a positive every 3 months. So it's just a hypothetical example. So which is like really high. If you have something like this going on, it means some area in your facility is exposed to some pathogen and it's not going away with rigorous cleaning. So at that time, it becomes imperative that you start doing some weekly activities, say a weekly listeria test, which you could do in-house with the 3M plates, and isolate those areas where you have the high counts, and that would help you to ensure that the infected areas are taken care of, and you could improve your third-party analysis testing results. So I talked about a cooking step or kill step. I'll repeat it again. Having a kill step or a cooking step does not mean that you are not prone to microbial growth. It also depends upon the likelihood of occurrences versus severity of those occurrences. So for example, if you have a listeria occurrence and the likelihood of that occurrence is say every 3 months or say every month, then that means the rigorous cleaning is not helping. You need to change your environmental monitoring program to assess and locate the right location. Probably you need to do vector swabbing and stuff like that so that you could isolate that area, find that area, and focus rigorous cleaning and see if what the results are coming back. So just another example, suppose you are again in a raw produce facility where the instruction step is to cook and eat, in which listeria is tested weekly, versus a facility where listeria testing is done on a monthly basis. A batch of raw agricultural produce is received at both the facilities that have some listeria presence that could come through the soil as well, which came in contact with the conveyor belt and which got carried over. A facility testing weekly may catch this pathogen earlier than the other one and could resolve this issue before producing, say, 10 more batches with listeria. So this is just an example of how you can monitor better. So some of the takeaways on frequency is sanitation effectives can be determined using the total plate count, the 3M plates, the rapid result plate, or the rapid listeria plates that we have for zone 1 surfaces, which I think it's a very good practice to be done in a raw produce facility or maybe in a dairy industry as well, where there's high chances of having any such presence. So sample frequency of zone 2 should always be greater than zone 3 and or zone 4. Determination of sample frequency should always be based upon the risk assessment or the hazard analysis in your facility. In case positives occur, always revisit your sampling program, always revisit your handling program to see if they are, like, why did they come? So what to do when we get positives? This is a situation nobody wants to face, but the first step would be to identify and isolate the area as soon as possible. Isolate and hold the product in question. Prepare for a product recall if it's necessary. Take some samples out of that product on hold. See if those have any presence or not. Take action, re-clean, wash, or retest those areas that have those presence. So this particular template, I found this a really nice template to be used as a guidance for food industry. This is from FDA's website. They have very nicely written down what to do when you have your first positive, what to do when you re-clean, retest, and you get your second positive. They have very nicely explained how to clean and sanitize the area where the positive occurs, and then conduct a comprehensive investigation. So, and when you get a second positive, you need to do an intensified cleaning and a rigorous cleaning, sanitizing for 3 consecutive days to see where those occurrences could have occurred, and disassemble the equipment to see if there are any hidden areas which are dirty and not maintained properly. So I think these guidance documents are really handy to give industries a pathway to what to do in such cases. And you can use them as guidance, but always understand that each facility is different and we need to follow something specific to that particular facility. So for example, I was working in the dairy industry and they had some listeria presence in their raw receiving area, and there was no presence in the product or no presence in the like final production area. Only the raw receiving area had that presence. So we had to like re-clean, re-wash everything, and then we moved to a weekly listeria plan so that we could detect the issue way earlier, and like we were able to control it. But the listeria would come back after like every 8-9 months, so which was concerning, and we were thinking why this was happening. So later on, we found out there was some debris that came in through the trucks that could have contributed to this issue. And so we started, like we used long hoses for loading or unloading the raw milk into the tank to rectify the issue, and nothing came back after it. So it depends upon experience, it depends upon what's happening in the facility. So some highlights: again, understand the product, processes, ingredients you're handling in the facility. Draw a likelihood versus a severity chart for your operations, like how severe the issue is and how much it's suffering. Separate high-risk areas from other areas. Train your employees to follow GMPs. Train your employees if they're moving from washup room directly to the production area. They need to change their gloves. They need to change their uniform and then come in the production area. Have a nice traffic flow throughout your facility to prevent high-risk areas coming in contact with the low-risk area. Sample and test as needed based upon your risk assessment. It's always a good idea to be proactive. Always remember recalls are more expensive and time-consuming than implementing a good environmental monitoring procedure. Seek expert guidance when needed. So if you have any more questions, you can contact me on rskfoodsafety@gmail.com. And now, if you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much, Richard. I'm going to put my camera back on. So I thank you for your presentation. And I have quite a few questions, by the way. So that's good because we have 18 minutes. First of all, I want to say Risha is a food safety consultant, so she's an expert in the field. So if you have any question, even after the meeting, you want to contact Richard. If you have questions, she will be there to assist you in your project. Now, I'm going to start with the first question that I see here on the screen. Richard, so what are the sampling methods I use in the environmental programs? Maybe that's someone that came in maybe a little bit later, because I know you went over that. Do you have any list of sampling methods or example of sampling methods?
So again, it depends. So for sampling methods, we would use a sampling procedure or a sampling SOP. So it again depends what kind of product you're handling. So when, say, for example, when I was in a raw produce facility, we would not evaluate it based upon units, because you cannot count, say, cut asparagus. You can't count one asparagus as one unit. You would want to measure them in kgs or batches of those kgs. So we would sample according to our customer. So for example, if we are sending 10,000 kgs to a customer, we would create a sampling plan of, and if, so our one package would be 10 kgs. So that would mean we have 100 packages of those 10 kgs. So we would sample like 5 out of those to have a representative sample. And those samples would be like 1 from the beginning, 2 from the middle of the run, and 2 from the end of the run, so that we have a representation of each and every time. So again, if we are in an, say, packaged food kind of facility, where you have ice cream packages, and you're producing 10,000 units, like 10,000 1.5 liter boxes in one shift, then 3 to 4 samples are enough throughout that time, because in ice cream, because those units go out really fast, like in 2 hours, you can finish up to like 2,000 or 3,000 units. So only 1 sample out of the beginning run, 1 sample out of the middle, and 1 near the end would be a representative.
Very well. Thank you. The next question is, what are the criteria used to determine if an environmental sample is within acceptable limits?
Sorry, can you repeat? You were breaking a little.
Yes. What are the criteria used to determine if an environmental sample is within acceptable limits?
So yeah, so this is a very good question, because you can't find those acceptable limits stated anywhere. And the reason behind that is it depends upon your facility. So the facility, the farming industry I was working in, we had a lot of soil debris coming through the facility, and the conveyor belts would have that soil and debris on it. So my ATP would show me values like 700, 800, which were like the medium range of cleaning effectiveness, because through those conveyor belt, my fresh produce would go through a cleaning chemical that would remove like all the debris out of it, and then it went directly into the packages. So it depends on what facility you're working in. In the dairy industry, when I was working, we had limits of not more than 100 on ATP, and we had zero tolerance for E. coli listeria. So for products which are ready to eat, you should have zero tolerance on pathogens such as E. coli, listeria, and salmonella. But if you're working in a fresh produce industry, sometimes you can get total plate count of say 10, 20, and things like that, because there's soil involved, which could give you some count. So regulatory wise also, it's I think the total plate count is less than 50,000 CFU. You should have less than 50,000 CFU in your raw milk,
Right.
but there's zero tolerance for finished products, say ice cream, flavored milk, or whatever.
Yes, yes. And now the next question is about the corrective action. And I know you touched over that a little bit in your presentation. What corrective actions are taken if environmental samples indicate a problem?
Yeah, the first and foremost step is hold the product. And if it's already out, call your customers, tell them to hold it. Hold it, and if your customers have already sold it, then it's a recall. If you have those positives in your facility, then find out what could be the cause of that positive. Find out if they are if the positive came from a third-party lab, then the presence is definitely there. But if the positive came out of your in-house lab, then recheck your pipettes, recheck your tables. Maybe those could be the reason your positive came from. Whatever product you have in hand, retest it to confirm that it's not a false positive.
Right.
Just to help yourself from any further labor of a recall.
Very good. Now the next question is about the training. As a quality manager, what training do employees receive regarding the environmental monitoring program?
So I always use this approach. Always, when you are thinking of training on environmental monitoring program, don't just give them raw words. Explain them through GMPs.
Right.
Explain them through, like, for example, I used to use this technique where I would say your hands have some good microbes or good bacteria and bad bacteria. We don't want that bad bacteria to get transferred to the food. So that's why washing hands, changing gloves is very imperative. The other thing which I would use is that sometimes what happened, a packaged flavored milk bottle would fall off the floor from some technician, and they would follow the 5-second rule, pick it up and keep it back on the line. I would say this is not a 5-second rule, because that floor has been exposed to some raw milk that may be going through your facility. It may contain something. So it's always better to explain them through example instead of like using the words such as listeria, salmonella, E. coli. They might not understand those things, but they may understand small jargon such as good and bad bacteria. So
yeah, and it's always great to be as simple as possible. So you want to make that simple to understand. Definitely agree. The last question that I have is about the effectiveness. So how is the effectiveness of the environmental monitoring program evaluated and improved over time?
So yeah, that's again a very good question. So I think what we can do, I touched upon likelihood and severity. What we can do a trend analysis for your facility, have all your past year's third-party reports and see what location had any kind of present and do a trend analysis similar to what you do for your customer complaints. You do a trend analysis for customer complaints. So similarly, do it for environmental, what pathogens are most, like for example, in any facility, if listeria is the most occurred, then you may, based upon the likelihood and severity, you can judge the effectiveness. And what we did was, because all of this is also related to sanitation, we would ask our sanitation manager to come with us and reassess the cleaning chemicals as well, and what ppm or what percentages of those cleaning chemicals we are using and how effective they are. So it's a combination of a few parameters. And for all-round effectiveness, you need to work on your cleaning chemical ppms, your occurrences, and your what happens when you re-clean. So all those, it's a combination of a few factors.
Yes, definitely. So that's all the questions that I have. Are there any more questions? Let me see if there are questions. So no question arrived so far. I'd like to thank you everyone for attending this webinar. And you have all the contacts. You have Risha's contact, you have Normex's contact. And again, we do this every month, and we do that in English and in French. So you always gonna have the opportunity to join and then to connect, to interact even with your question to increase the knowledge. We do support the industry. Of course, we do have our software, which is a food safety management software, and we support all the SMEs, one at a time. So don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll say goodbye and see you next month. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you.